Hello, I'm Ajat Ahmed. I'm a visiting faculty at OB Jindal Global University. The module is about gender equality under the Constitution. The intended learning outcomes of the module are to introduce the concept of gender equality with respect to LGBT rights as enshrined in the Constitution and interpreted by the courts in India. To familiarize the students to the idea that the Constitution is sex and gender blind while guaranteeing fundamental rights to its citizens. It's pertinent to understand the distinction between sex and gender. It has been understood that sex is biologically determined and gender is socially constructed. However, there is also a suggestion that there is no real distinction between sex and gender, and that from the very outset one becomes the other. In this module, we will function with the understanding that sex is biologically determined and gender is a social construct. We have a binary understanding of sex and gender as male and female or man and woman. There is also an inherent assumption that a person's sex determines his or her sexual orientation. That is, it's assumed that men are attracted only to women and vice versa. This is the assumption of heteronormativity, which assumes that everyone is heterosexual. Thus, a binary understanding of sex and gender coupled with heteronormativity pushes LGBT persons to the margins. This chapter will look into some of these ideas and the ways in which the Constitution has been invoked to challenge these norms. Now let's look at the distinction between gender and sex. Gender and sex are understood in a binary of man, woman, and male, female. People are assigned female at birth or male at birth, and this discrimination is primarily based on a biological determination. It is assumed that persons assigned female at birth would conform to socially prescribed gender roles, gender expressions, and gender performance of a woman. Gender is constructed socially through many ways. For instance, it's determined that boys like to play with cars and girls play with dolls. Similarly, a man is expected to be the breadwinner and the woman runs the house. These preset roles construct gender. However, some people do not conform to the gender that their sex is expected to follow and are broadly classified as transgender persons. A working definition of transgender has been provided in the report of the expert committee on issued of transgender persons as all persons whose own sense of gender does not match with the gender assigned to them at birth. They will include trans men and trans women, whether or not they have undergone sex reassignment, surgery, or hormonal treatment or laser therapy, etc. Gender queers and a number of sociocultural identities such as Kinnars, Hijras, Arhavanis, Joglas, etc. The Supreme Court has recognized gender identity as one of the most fundamental aspects of life and has upheld the rights of transgender persons in the case of National Legal Services Authority versus Union of India. Let's look at gender equality under the Constitution. Part 3 of the Constitution guarantees fundamental rights. All these rights are guaranteed to persons irrespective of their gender or sex. Article 14 guarantees equality before law to all persons. Article 15.1, 15.2 and 16.2 vehemently prohibit discrimination on grounds of sex. Article 19.1 ensures the right to freedom of speech and expression to all citizens. Article 21 guarantees a life of dignity to all persons. The fundamental foundation of equality before law and equal protection rests on the constitutional premise that the sex of the person is irrelevant, save where special provision is made within the Constitution for a section, like for women in Article 15.3. Therefore, the Constitution in all its essence is sex-blind. Now let's look at the relevant articles of the Indian Constitution. Article 14. Equality before law. The state shall not deny to any person equality before the law or the equal protection of the laws within the territory of India. Prohibition of discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. Article 15. Prohibition of discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth. Number 1. The state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them. Number 2. No citizen shall, on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them, be subject to any disability, liability, restriction, or condition with regard to A. Access to shops, public restaurants, hotels, and places of public entertainment, or B. The use of wells, tanks, bathing ghats, roads, and places of public resort maintained wholly or partly out of state funds or dedicated to the use of the general public. Number 3. Nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any special provision for women and children. Article 19.1. Protection of certain rights regarding freedom of speech, etc. 1. All citizens shall have right to freedom of speech and expression. Article 21. Protection of life and personal liberty. No person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. Now let's look at sexual orientation as analogous to sex. It has been laid down in Nas Foundation versus NCT of Delhi. Sexual orientation is a ground analogous to sex, and that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation is not permitted by Article 15. Further, Article 15.2 incorporates the notion of horizontal application of rights. In other words, it even prohibits discrimination of one citizen by another in matters of access to public spaces. In our view, discrimination on the ground of sexual orientation is impermissible even on the horizontal application of the right enshrined under Article 15. Now let's examine sex as gender identity. in National Legal Service, Authority versus Union of India, NALSA versus Union of India, the court held that gender identity, which lies at the core of one's personal identity, gender expression and presentation, will have to be protected under Article 19(1)(a) of the Indian Constitution. The court held gender identity therefore lies at the core of one's personal identity, gender expression and presentation, and therefore it will have to be protected under Article 19(a) of the Constitution of India. A transgender personality could be expressed by the transgender's behavior and presentation. State cannot prohibit, restrict, or interfere with the transgender's expression of such personality, which reflects that inherent personality. Often, the state and its authorities, either due to ignorance or otherwise, fail to digest the innate character and identity of such persons. We therefore hold that values of privacy, self-identity, autonomy, and personal integrity are fundamental rights guaranteed to members of the transgender community under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India, and the state is bound to protect and recognize these rights. The court further went on to state that both gender and biological attributes constitute distinct components of sex. The discrimination on grounds of sex under Article 15 and 16 thus includes discrimination on the grounds of sexual identity. Furthermore, the court in NALSA versus Union of India held that the expression sex used in Article 15 and 16 is not limited to biological sex of male or female, but intended to include people who consider themselves male or female. Now let's look at the conclusion. The Constitution safeguards the rights of the minorities. However, small in number they are, further discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity ought to be recognized under the Constitution. The module ends here. Thank you very much.